Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable, high-performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore.
So I'm guessing if you're human listening to this, you'd know the feeling that I'm going to describe, where everything just piles on at once. One issue becomes three becomes seven becomes 20, and suddenly it just feels like you've hit a wall. And not a small obstacle wall, like a proper, big, hard wall. And maybe your inner voice says something like, I can't do this, or this isn't fair. Or why is this happening now? Why is this happening to me? And maybe it looks obvious to you what the problem is. So it's your circumstances, or maybe it's a specific person. But here's what I think is an uncomfortable truth for most of us. But yet it's a game changer if you're open to at least considering it. It's that the wall isn't out there. The real wall, is your thinking about what's out there. And until we see that clearly, you're going to keep trying to knock down the wall that actually isn't there. And the wall isn't actually made of your circumstances or what somebody is doing. And I think the key point that I'm going to share in today's episode is that challenging circumstances don't automatically create psychological suffering. Unseen, unhelpful thinking does. Now, before you push back or maybe even switch off, I'm not saying that circumstances don't matter. They do. Of course they do. But so I'm not saying that you ignore injustice or loss or real pressure. You don't. And it's what I'm not saying here in today's episode is, look, let's just think positive. That's the furthest thing that I'm actually saying, because to me that's shallow and it's ineffective. What I'm talking today actually is about really refined psychological mechanics. Now think about this. Two people can face the same setback, but one can spiral and one can stabilize and handle it. Why? The difference isn't in the event or the circumstances, it's in the relationship to their thinking about the event or circumstances. And that's what I'm exploring here. So it doesn't mean in any way that circumstances are irrelevant. What I'm saying is that when it comes to suffering, in my experience, what seems to be true is that suffering is not being generated by events or people themselves. It's been generated by the story that our mind is constructing and narrating about those events. So when you say, this shouldn't be happening, this ruins everything, or this means I've failed, you're assuming you're reacting to reality, but you're not. You're actually reacting to your interpretation of reality, which is very subtle but very, very powerful. And your reaction to that interpretation, from that you create a perspective. And that perspective pretty much determines your behavior and how you feel about something. So if you step back and look at it, circumstances really are neutral data. We add the meaning to the circumstance. How do we do that? We do it through our thinking. Our thinking adds meaning. So that could be judgment or cynicism or anger or maybe forecasting or blame. And unfortunately, then when that thinking kind of loops, usually without us realizing it, we get trapped. We feel trapped. But if you consider what I'm saying, what that means is the reality is that you're not trapped in circumstance. You're actually trapped in your thinking about those circumstances. Now, circumstances, I think it's helpful to think about them a bit like the weather. Rain is rain, cold is cold, wind is wind. And imagine now if you're standing outside shouting at the rain. Now in Ireland, recent times, you might see a lot of people doing that, certainly given that because there's been so much rain in recent weeks. But if you saw somebody standing outside shouting at the rain with their fist pointing towards the sky, and maybe they're shouting, "This shouldn't be happening. I had plans. You've ruined it. This always happens to me. Why today?" The rain will just continue, but the person's suffering and anger just increases. It's not because of the rain, it's because of the argument in that person's head, which I think is us at times for sure. And leaders and performers do this constantly, which creates suffering, unnecessary suffering, and then importantly, that hampers performance. So inevitably in business, markets will shift, a key hire will leave, a deal will collapse, or in your personal life, a health issue will appear, an unwelcome one. And instead of just in dealing with the facts of rain just being rain, we begin wrestling internally with the story, the narrative. I shouldn't be in this position. This means something about me, or this is going to ruin everything. And that is the invisible wall. It's not the event, it's the resistance inside. And the more that we mentally fight what's already happened or happening, the more solid the invisible wall will feel. But here's something that I think is fascinating. The moment you stop rehearsing the story, listening to the story, believing the story, even just briefly, something steadier comes in. Now, it's not positivity and it's not denial of reality. It's just something deeper. Now, Joseph Jaworski, who I interviewed on this particular podcast and also somebody that I worked with for a period of time, he would call it source. Now, source is to me the deeper intelligence in life. It's like a quieter intelligence beneath the noise of our reactive thinking. And you've definitely felt it before if you're human. It's moments when the situation didn't change, but maybe your internal fight inside dropped or you just gave up. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you had clarity. You could think clearly again. You felt more connected perhaps to the moment, even in really challenging circumstances. And because of that, you were able to act cleanly. You could take what they call right action. You could even appreciate something inside the difficulty of it. Now that shift to source, to this kind of deeper knowing, that shift didn't come from solving the event. Really, it came from stepping out of the mental war that goes inside as a reaction to events that we don't like. So let's have a little think about some questions to integrate this. And as a side note, if you want to read some other articles that I'm doing in related topics, check out my Substack platform. I'll put the note in the show notes here, the link in the show notes. I'm playing around with more. I'm quite enjoying it as a way to kind of help clarify my own thinking on certain things. So there's lots of stuff on Substack that's not going to be in the podcast or even anywhere else, not even my weekly emails. So if you're interested, check it out. There's usually a long post once a week minimum. So 3 questions for you now. The first, and again, just bear in mind when I'm asking these questions, I'm not trying to fix anything for you. It's more to help us all see more clearly with fresh eyes. So first question, where in your life right now do you believe the wall is out there? As in like, that's the problem over there. This is my problem. It's money. It's a lack of clients. It's that person who's causing me a problem. Be honest with yourself. What situation feels like the problem? Let's identify something. There's going to be something. Second question then is, okay, now that you've identified it, what story are you telling yourself about that situation or that person that's actually amplifying your stress or your anxiety or your suffering? Not the facts of the situation, but the interpretation of the facts of the situation. And then number 3, right, well, let's try an experiment. What would happen or what happens even for a moment if you stop mentally arguing with what's already happened? Now, you don't have to prove it. You don't have to like it. Just stop the internal fight. Can you do that? And if you do that, what do you notice? Like what shifts? As simple as that sounds, it can be quite powerful. So here's maybe the key takeaway, I think, is that circumstances, like I suppose I'll often say, life is a full contact sport. You are going to get hit. That's inevitable. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Now, circumstances will at times be difficult for us, but they don't automatically create psychological suffering. What does that is our reactive thinking to that situation, to circumstances. And when you take time to just step back and see that clearly, not intellectually, but actually for what it is, just experientially, something changes. You can still handle a situation responsibly. You'll still take action, and you still address the reality of a real world issue. But inside, you stop killing yourself with constant mental resilience. And paradoxically, in my experience, that's where real resilience emerges. Not because life became easier, but because you stop fighting it inside. And the wall dissolves when you realize it was actually built from thought. And underneath that thinking, there's something very steady, very strong. We can call it source, we can call it a deeper life intelligence, whatever you want to call it, whatever your name is. It's the home of real clarity. And it's the area I think as I'm going along in my life that I'm most interested in. And I talk about it a little bit towards the latter half of my book, The Inner CEO. But the bottom line is that deeper intelligence is available to everybody the moment that we stop arguing inside ourselves with reality. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.